Part 3, final one. Here we go. I had so much fun with this. It took an hour of planning, but Elton managed to work out the perfect scenario. Out the back gate, down the alley, to the cross street, and up to Bentley's side of the street. At the neighbor's drive, he cut up to Bethany's garage and played a cartoon-like stealth game. Flattened against the door, he slipped around the corner of the house and hugged the other wall as closely as he could without trampling the flowers that reminded him much of Un's garden. Still, unless Bethany stood at the window, she'd never see him coming. And that's the key to this thing. Stealth. It only works. Elton? Really? Elton? Elton inched toward the door, poised to hang up the basket. If she doesn't see me. He'd almost hooked the handle on the doorknob when the door jerked open. What are you doing? He raised his head and met her confused gaze. Well, I know what you're doing, but what's with the 007 moves? You saw that? Bethany grabbed his shirt sleeve and dragged him to the middle of the yard, right in front of her large picture window. What do you see? There it was, in the reflection of a minivan's side windows, a perfect picture of them standing there, him still holding the paper basket. Oh. Her gaze fell to the basket. I don't know what to do. That was probably the last thing he would have expected her to say. About what? Well, you're supposed to hang that on the door, do a ding-dong ditch, and run. I'm supposed to try to catch you. Right? A slow smile formed. If he had any doubt about just how interested he really was, it would have run for its life at that smile. Well, I caught you before you could do that. I don't know what happens with that. And Elton winced. That's what Mary Margaret described. I don't know what happens either. The afternoon fuzzed around them with all the romantic glow of a cheesy Hallmark movie. Then, as if inspired by the old gal herself, Elton knew exactly what to do. He slipped his hand into hers and led her across the street. Where are we going? To the expert, of course. She froze in the middle of the sidewalk. Can I at least shut my front door? While he had the guts to do it, Elton just shrugged. I'll pick you up out front in 2. Belton? Bethany had made it to her front yard before turning around and calling back, we should pick up flowers for her, too. That's when he realized he still held the basket of flowers in his hand. All right, last spot. Mary Margaret Montmorency knelt before her garden, working the soil around a cluster of hollyhocks when Elton pulled up in front of the tiny Sears and Roebuck bungalow where had lived almost since her arrival in America. The Rhodesia, the land agent called it, a tiny house, just the 2 bedrooms, of course, but perfect for Gerald and me, and with my flowers I could make it feel like a proper English home even here. She said it any time someone commented on the charm of her house. Bethany began raving before he could turn off the engine. It's exactly what I tried to do with my house. I knew I should have bought on this side of town, but Dad thought the older houses would have more problems. He's right about that. One in particular. The way her head whipped around released a whiff of her shampoo. Elton had never been able to determine what scent it was. It was just clean. Do you think so? What? The worst of all, for me, his throat shriveled into a dry, cracked crust of its former self. A choked, hard swallow helped. Since when do I flirt? And without even thinking about it. Bethany, on the other hand, donned her sassy mantle. She elbowed him after several long seconds had passed and prompted, You still haven't told me what that is, the worst of all for me bit. Not meeting you. The sass melted into a pool of sweet tea that any Southerner would appreciate. But you would have. You and Tolkien would have visited Mary Margaret Montmorency as you do every week or two. He would have demanded a walk, and she swept the street with what could only be described as a discerning eye and pointed to a house catty-cornered to I would have stepped out of that house to be sure I could meet such a handsome... Elton choked when the impish quality returned to her tone. Dog? Exactly. Arrived. Before he said something he wasn't ready to admit, Elton grabbed the cone-shaped basket with the carnations and daisies filling it and reached for the door handle. Wish me luck. I can't let her know I want to be caught. You do? Though he couldn't bring himself to look at her, Elton explained in a low murmur as he climbed from the car. Get caught, get kissed? Yeah. A guy wants to get caught. I'll remember that. Those words prompted him to pop his head back in the car one last time. He caught and held her gaze. You do that. Pushing the door closed so that it wouldn't startle essential. It was also essential to keeping his secret until the last second. Risking a scolding, he crept along the grass beside the walkway so as not to crunch the gravel and alert her to his presence. 4 steps up, hang the basket on the door, and turn. She stood there, a great straw hat covering her snowy hair, and garden-gloved hands on her hips. Akimbo, she called it when describing some story or another. I caught you. So you did. Despite climbing the steps, she still stood too short to kiss his cheek without his help. Elton moved down a couple of steps and leaned close. That better? Quite. She retrieved the basket and beamed over it. I didn't think until you'd left yesterday that you might do it. And then I didn't let myself hope. But I decided to be prepared. Just in case. To his amused astonishment, she stepped down, hooked her arm through his, and led him back down the walk. You took your time about it, too. My knees will ache for days, although the hollyhocks haven't fussed yet. She smiled at Bethany. You must introduce me to your lady friend. She's actually why I'm here. Bethany stepped from the car as they approached, ready to finally meet the much-spoken-of Mary Margaret Montmorency. But both her and Elton blinked at the woman's next words. I hoped you'd bring Bethany around soon. I've been anxious to meet her. He's talked about me, talked about her? Heat crept up his neck at an alarming and increasing intense pace when smiled, transferred her flowers to the hand already laced through his arm, and hooked her other through Bethany's. Only 6 times a visit. He's not indiscreet. Ellen taught him better than that, but when a young man's thoughts stray to a lovely young lady, it's difficult to keep her from his conversation. Let me sink right through the concrete. Is that so? All the way to China. Both women stopped and stared at him, and that's when Elton realized he'd spoken aloud. Just an expression. Not until they were seated on Mary Margaret Montmorency's overstuffed couch with its chintz cabbage roses being squished by their backsides and holding delicate teacups in their hands did settle herself in her favorite chair and beam at them. Now, what brings you to me besides my lovely flowers? If he doubted the choice of carnations and daisies, and he most certainly had, he had only to see her finger stroke the petal of one daisy to realize he'd made precisely the perfect decision. Bethany. Both women snapped to attention. Bethany spoke first. That's putting it one way. The only way, as far as I can see. Mary Margaret Montmorency gave me the idea for the basket and told me how it works, what happens if someone catches you after you leave it, but he gave Bethany a sheepish smile before turning back to what do you do if they catch you before you can hang it on the door? A half-suppressed giggle preceded eventual response. Catching is catching, dear Elton. If you're caught, she gave Bethany a knowing look. Well, you're caught. And, as if she hadn't just issued the equivalent of an order to rectify the situation, Mary Margaret Montmorency stood, collected their tea things, and carried them from the room. You'll excuse me for a moment, won't you? I'll just wash these up. Won't take more than 5 minutes or so. Again, as if he hadn't spent 6 months trying to work up the courage just to ask her out for coffee, Elton's courage rose to the occasion. He turned to her with a more casual finesse than he felt and quirked one eyebrow. He hoped. You heard the expert. I'm caught. The rest is on you. By the time returned to her parlor, Elton and Bethany were seated beside one another with a most circumspect air about them. But Bethany's rosy cheeks, the hint of a smile at the corner of Elton's lips, and their fingers laced together told quite a different story, he suspected. Elton's smile grew at Mary Margaret Montmorency's indulgent look. What can I say? His eyes questioned her. It was what you would probably call a lovely kiss. As her expression shifted from indulgent to beaming, he added, and why did I wait 6 months again? Well, hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to click a link somewhere. I don't know where we're putting it, but for the sequel, The Versary, and I just hope you're having as much fun as possible right now, and you're finding all the great books that are out there to read. I hope you're enjoying the read-alongs. I've been enjoying getting the videos together for these authors and seeing what they're doing. It's a whole lot of fun, and I really appreciate Sandy for coming up with the idea. So have a good one. Bye.